This year's APEC Leaders Meeting came to a close with the Gyeongju Declaration designed to drive forward the forum's commitment to cooperation for growth. With more press perspective today. Hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday, November 3rd here in Seoul, and you're watching Press Perspective. Today we walk through the foreign media coverage of the APEC Multilateral Meeting and the bilateral sideline summits that took place here last week. For this, I have Fabian Kretschmer with German press agency DPA in the studio. Fabian, welcome back.
Happy to be here.
I also have Shreyas ready with news website NK News. Shreyas, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Fabian, we shall start with you. Let's begin with details of the three documents adopted at this year's APEC Leaders Meeting in the historic city of Gyeongju last week and their relevance, of course.
Well, the Gyeongju Declaration is really the masterpiece of this summit. And on a positive note, it's good that there is a declaration. I mean, it was not really clear in the beginning whether all countries would agree to one joint statement. So I think it is a success that we have a declaration. But if you look at the declaration, then at least from my point of view, it is a little bit disappointing that all reference towards free trade were really toned down. I mean, usually in previous APEC declarations, there would be one clause or one sentence that says we reaffirm a multilateral trade system with the WTO at its core, with the World Trade Organization. This was this time omitted. I mean, no reference to the World Trade Organization. Why? I mean, it's obvious that the US government, who has quite a different understanding of global trade, made some pressure and was actually quite successful in that regard. So in my opinion, it was a little bit disappointing that there was no reference to the WTO and to tariffs. So there's a big elephant in the room that is not mentioned in this declaration. The second document was the APEC Artificial Intelligence Initiative, so the AI initiative. You can say that this is a success for the South Korean government because they've been pushing this topic quite a bit, especially President Lee Jae-myung. And yeah, it says a lot of things about AI that all countries, including China and the US, agree to, share knowledge regarding AI. That they agree that, the whole population should benefit from AI developments, etc. Good rhetoric. It sounds very good, but I mean, there's a catch. I will come to that later. The third document is the APEC Collaborative Framework for Demographic Changes. Also, that is I would say, a diplomatic win for South Korea because demographic challenges is a problem that South Korea is really facing and also wants to find solutions and also wants to be at the forefront in finding solutions. So we have all these beautiful words, beautiful rhetoric, but the catch is that those documents are not binding. There's not really an enforcement mechanisms. So, for example, if countries agree to, share knowledge about AI, etc., it sounds good, but does it mean anything concrete? Not really. So, I mean, at least we have some beautiful documents, but we don't have any enforcement really.
Right. Meanwhile, Shreyas, what has been the general foreign media response to this year's multilateral meeting of global leaders under the APEC framework here in South Korea?
To some extent, I think for much of the foreign media and global media, a lot of the interest was driven by Donald Trump in particular and his summits with Xi Jinping particularly, but also Lee Jae-myung, also other leaders. And it did seem to us that perhaps that interest died down a little bit. It dissipated after he left, essentially before the main APEC Economic Leaders Meeting. Even a summit with Xi Jinping, it didn't actually take place in Gyeongju where APEC was held. They just moved the venue to Busan. So as soon as he made his way away, that interest tended to die down. Now, obviously, there was still some interest in the main APEC summit, particularly from media affiliated with the participating countries. For example, once Xi Jinping arrived, Chinese media in particular, but also a lot of global media were interested in his actions. And from South Korea's perspective, obviously, Lee Jae-myung was center stage. He was meeting with Xi Jinping, meeting with so many other leaders. So there was definitely still some interest, but perhaps muted compared to what it was like on the day Trump was in Gyeongju. And As Fabian mentioned, obviously, the Gyeongju declaration was certainly a big deal in terms of the level of attention it got on the day. And the AI and demographic challenges were a bit of a boost. But it kind of paled in comparison to what happened on the sidelines or what people were hoping for on the sidelines. I think another aspect perhaps to bear in mind, of course, is when it came to the week's events, different media outlets had different levels of access at the event. And so that essentially kind of led to perhaps a bit more focus on events like the CEO Summit, where there was a much more driven agenda, and Jensen Huang's, NVIDIA President Jensen Huang's talk in particular was often the center of attention, in many ways overshadowed some of the leaders' event meetings. So there were some positives, some negatives, but it did feel like compared to those business events, the main leaders' meeting felt like a bit of a side event rather than the main attraction.
Right. Fabian, as Shreyas just pointed out, quite a number of these bilateral summits that took place on the margins of the APEC Leaders Meeting made quite a bit of headlines, including, of course, the meeting between President Lee Jae-myung and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. Could you tell us a bit more about that particular summit that took place this past Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, the aspect that we from DPA covered was actually the North Korea aspect that, Lee Jae-myung asked China in helping getting the dialogue with North Korea running. But Shreyas is the North Korea expert. I will leave that to you to elaborate on that. But what I found quite remarkable is that Lee Jae-myung was emphasizing China's important role in bringing peace on the Korean peninsula. I mean, that I don't want to say that this statement is not accurate. I think it is to some degree, but at the same time, China is also quite aggressively pursuing interests in the South China Sea. It's threatening against Taiwan. So, of course, in that context, if you only mention one side, that China is important for bringing peace to the Korean peninsula, but leave out all the other threats, I really hope from my experience in Europe that countries like Korea will not make the same mistake that my country, for example, Germany, did when dealing with Russia. And then Ukraine war happened, that you should be alert also within the Asia-Pacific region that there's also threats and a potential conflict going on. But yeah, that is on the hard news side. I would also share maybe on a lighter note, one thing I found very interesting, the gift aspect, the gift diplomacy. We know that Lee Jae-myung sent a crown to Trump, which you can also see in a very ironic way, but I mean, it is funny. But President Xi Jinping gave Lee Jae-myung Xiaomi smartphones. And the interaction that developed in that scene was quite interesting. There were some mics, so reporters caught that on camera. Lee Jae-myung said, what about communication safety? Is it safe to communicate with those phones? And it was meant as a joke. And Xi Jinping reacted quite spontaneously, and that's something that we don't get often to see. He said, well, you can check if there are some back doors. I mean, meaning if there's some, possibility for espionage. And then, both were laughing. I mean, it's kind of also a serious topic, but they made fun and were kind of spontaneous, so you can see both get along quite well. And that was actually a brief moment where we could see Xi Jinping, how he really interacts.
Right, the easy banter between the two leaders also made quite a bit of local headlines as well. Shreyas, as Fabian mentioned, President Lee Jae-myung's efforts to engage Chinese leader Xi Jinping to reach out to North Korea made headlines. Could you tell us a bit more about that particular exchange?
Yes. So Lee Jae-myung has, since he came to power earlier this year, been very keen to emphasize his approach to renewing engagement with North Korea, as well as promoting denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. And even before the summit began, the presidential office said this would be part of the agenda when talking with Xi Jinping, because China is one of North Korea's main allies and thus exercise a lot of influence over them. And from what we heard from the presidential office after, he did bring this up and essentially sought China's support with promoting engagement with North Korea, pointing to China's recent surge in diplomatic activities with North Korea. For example, Kim Jong-un's visit to Beijing in September for a summit with Xi Jinping and China's Victory Day parade, followed a month later by Foreign Minister Choi Son-hee's visit again for talks with the Chinese Premier and Foreign Minister Wang Yi. So Lee Jae-myung definitely hoped to get more out of this Chinese influence, and so sought to promote this vision of peace in the Korean Peninsula through China. And it's according to the South Korean Presidential Office, at least the Chinese seemed somewhat responsive to this. But the Chinese readouts were quite different. They didn't make any mention of North Korea or the Korean Peninsula. They definitely did not touch upon denuclearization. And that is something that perhaps is now reflective of how China views any North Korea-related themes. They essentially did the same thing after the Xi-Kim summit in September, when they both sides completely left out the theme of denuclearization, which is a change from the pre-2019 approach, when China at least would be keen to emphasize it. And so it kind of signals that China, while it's trying to bring back or restore its strong relations with North Korea, it does not see denuclearization as a big priority anymore. The first thing is just to be friendly. Possibly if Trump or someone whom China wants to curry favor with, or at least have some sort of leverage over, says, can you help me talk to Kim Jong-un, maybe they could respond. But at this point, North Korea does not appear keen to talk to Washington either. So China doesn't really have anything going for it if either South Korea or the US wants it to approach North Korea.
Right, and speaking about talks between North Korea's Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump, Fabian, I remember last week, back on Monday and Tuesday, we talked about prospects of that meeting between Trump and Kim, and you shared your negative thoughts regarding that, saying it was probably not going to be happening. It was probably not going to happen. You were right. That being said, do you suppose an actual face-to-face between Trump and Kim would be possible during Trump's second term in office?
Well, first of all, thanks for pointing out that I was correct. But to be fair, I mean, most people shared the same assessment, so it was not a big achievement. I think it was really unlikely. But for future summits between Trump and Kim, we know that Trump is more than open to it. He's almost begging for it. I mean, he wants to have a meeting with Kim Jong-un. That is very clear. He repeatedly made that clear. Kim doesn't seem to be interested now, but that can change. I could imagine one scenario, for example, at some point, hopefully the war in Ukraine, I mean, now it doesn't seem as it would stop soon, but if it would stop, then I think North Korea would have much less benefit for or use for Russia's Putin. I mean, so basically then North Korea would have more incentive to seek out, negotiations with the US and get more leverage from Trump, and then a meeting would be quite likely. That would be only one scenario. So Trump is definitely interested. Why? Because I think the Nobel Peace Prize could be one aspect. He wants to have the Nobel Peace Prize, and I think the conflict in the Korean Peninsula could be one way to at least get positive media attention. And in general, he just likes strong autocratic state leaders. He also has a kind of a thing for Xi Jinping, for Putin. He admires those kind of strong personalities, and I think Kim Jong-un especially so. He seems to have some kind of genuine admiration for him. I mean, maybe, I don't want to compare those two figures, but he clearly gets along with him well. For Kim Jong-un, I don't think right now he has much of an interest, but I would say chances are at least 50-50, maybe 70-30, because we still have more years to come with Trump.
Right, indeed. Shreyas, North Korea, for its part last week, reaffirmed its commitment to its nuclear weapons program. It, in fact, engaged in quite a few, if I may, displays of defiance. Could you walk us through?
So I think pretty much a lot of this started just a day before Trump arrived in South Korea, when North Korea went and tested strategic cruise missiles. And in some ways, this perhaps seemed to send a message saying that we are not giving up our nuclear ambitions, and we do oppose Trump and the US and South Korea as long as they do not abandon the goal of denuclearization. And this is in many ways perhaps consistent with how North Korea has approached the nuclear issue in recent years. Kim Jong-un said a few years ago, North Korea's nuclear status is irreversible, and that is something that they have maintained consistently. And even last year, even last week, we saw a lot of this happening as North Korea just wanted to show it's still keen to develop its weapons capabilities, it's still keen to push ahead, but it also has powerful friends. It does not need to rely solely on negotiations with the US, which is perhaps what it once attempted in 2018-19. Now, it has Russia in its corner, it has China in its corner, and the Russia aspect, for example, was something that certainly came up when North Korean Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee visited Russia last week. She held talks with Vladimir Putin and her counterpart Sergei Lavrov, and there the aspect of cooperation between the two countries was certainly strong, but particularly military cooperation. She highlighted the continuing relationship between the two countries and and expressed support for Russia's war against Ukraine, and in particular highlighted North Korea's troops who fought alongside Russian forces in that conflict as essentially a heroic act, which is very much consistent with how Pyongyang has been portraying this situation in recent months. But also, just going beyond that, we talked earlier about the Lee Jae-myung-Xi Jinping summit and the talk of denuclearization. Just before that summit, South Korea announced that denuclearization would be on the agenda, and North Korea responded even before the summit saying, essentially, this is a pipe dream. It firmly rejected everything South Korea is pursuing and said, as long as you hold on to this hope, there will be no change and we will continue to oppose it. They did not comment on China, of course, because China is their ally. From their perspective, South Korea is the one that's lagging behind on this goal. And so essentially they were continuing that message that they sent with the cruise missile tests, with the visit to Russia, saying fundamentally we are continuing our military and nuclear development, and we have friends who will back us. There's nothing you can do about it, so just give up on that.
Right. All this, of course, taking place while the APEC meeting was taking place here in South Korea, of course. And speaking about that, Fabian, next year China is looking to host this annual event. That being said, what is the European media's interest, perhaps, of keeping its eye on?
Well, I mean, next year it will be in Shenzhen, and then China will be in the spotlight. That will be interesting for European media, definitely. I think there are several aspects they would be interested in, whether China would advance its influence within the Asia-Pacific. Also, one regard is China's trade policies. The moment that we are seeing right now reminds me of Trump's first term. At that time, Xi Jinping gave a speech in Davos at the World Economic Forum, praising world, multilateral trade, and it looked like we have a voice of reason. While Trump is, starting tariff wars, Xi Jinping is, defending the international rules-based order. But actually, in terms of actions, we saw the opposite. We also saw China, implementing protectionist measures around its economy and basically starting trade frictions. I mean, the trade war that Trump started was also a reaction to China's state capitalist system. So I think there will be an assessment whether China can be an alternative world order that maybe propagates a more open trade, or whether that is actually not the case. And then just one brief aspect. I mean, will the Taiwanese delegation also take part? That is a big question, because there are laws in China that say, okay, if you're a Taiwan separatist, you can be executed. There are national security laws that say that you can be punished in a very cruel way. And China classifies the government right now as being separatists. That's what they say. So the Taiwanese side, for example, they need a written statement that their physical safety will not be endangered when they go to China. That is a very interesting aspect that will reveal a lot about China, whether they would be open to Taiwan participating. And when I say Taiwan, officially it's only allowed to participate under Chinese Taipei. I mean, that already shows you the power dynamic. So those aspects could be very interesting, and I'm looking forward to the event in Shenzhen.
Right. And Shreyas, what more can you add to the issues of interest as we await for next year's APEC gathering in China?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see how things develop from what we've seen at last week's APEC events, particularly the follow-through on Lee Jae-myung's inter-Korean initiatives and his stated support for Donald Trump's role as a quote-unquote peacemaker regarding North Korea. Will there be progress on that? Trump has certainly, as Fabian indicated, mentioned that he wants to meet Kim Jong-un again and would love to come back to the Korean Peninsula to make that happen. But this time China was the focus, but who knows? Maybe he will renew that focus as he continues his quest for a Nobel Peace Prize. But what we need to see is how much will it be a priority and will Kim Jong-un respond? Another theme coming out of that summit was South Korea's, or rather Trump's approval of South Korea's proposal to acquire nuclear subs. So there's still a lot of questions about that in terms of where and how it will be made, whether the US Congress will give it approval, where the fissile material will come from. And so as the two sides continue talks, we'll probably start getting more details and try to understand the nitty-gritty of it all a lot more. Same time, we also want to see what comes out of the Lee Jae-myung-Xi Jinping summit and Lee Jae-myung's summit with Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. Will cooperation continue there as they have pledged? He signed agreements with Xi Jinping and at the same time pledged continued friendship, future-oriented relationship with Japan. So how do these develop as things go on? That is something that we will want to keep an eye on, including, of course, trade. Trade deals were a big part of South Korea's talks with the US and China in particular. And so how do they follow through on those landmark trade deals that were and cooperation agreements that were reached? And then perhaps one closing note is in terms of the overall APEC focus, what is the follow-through on the Gyeongju declaration? As Fabian mentioned, there's a lot of specifics that still need to be worked out. How do you approach a lot of these themes? And those two key initiatives of AI and demographics, these are challenges that China is also prioritizing. So as we head to APEC 2026 in China, how much will China make it part of the agenda? How much will other countries feed into that process? We'd want to continue seeing the follow-through on that. And in terms of what South Korea is doing, China is doing, and the rest of the APEC community.
Right, as you said, the words have been exchanged. Now we just have to wait and see whether the action is taken. Yeah. All right, Shreyas, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Fabian, thank you very much for your insights. Right, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.